I always believed trust was binary. You either trust completely or not at all. For 7 years of marriage, I trusted my wife, Marina, with every fiber of my being. I'm a software engineer by trade, a logical man in a tech-driven world, and I approached our relationship with the same rational confidence I applied to my work. But a few months ago, subtle anomalies started creeping into our life. At first, I dismissed them as noise in the signal, until the evidence began to compile in my mind. It started with small deviations in her routine. Marina, a project manager at a mid-sized tech firm, suddenly had more late nights at the office and weekend work events. At first, I admired her dedication. I recall making her a thermos of coffee one night when she claimed an urgent release was keeping her past midnight. She smiled and thanked me, but her eyes flickered away, just for a second. It was out of character, that fleeting avoidance of eye contact, a tiny red flag. Then came the guarded cell phone behavior. Marina had never been secretive with her devices. We both knew each other's passcodes, not that we ever felt the need to snoop. But now her phone was constantly face down on the table, silenced notifications, and she'd excuse herself to another room to take certain calls. I'd catch glimpses of her smiling at texts, and then quickly tucking the phone away when I entered the room. Late one evening, I awoke to the faint glow of her phone on the opposite side of the bed. She was turned away, seemingly asleep, but the phone screen was on. As I quietly leaned over, I saw an unfamiliar number sending a message. "Can't wait to see you again." Before I could read more, she stirred and pressed the phone to her chest. My heart skipped a beat, but I pretended I hadn't seen anything and rolled back, mind racing in the darkness. Sleep became a stranger to me. I found myself lying there, staring at the ceiling fan slicing through the air, analyzing every interaction from the past weeks. The way she'd come home with her hair freshly brushed and a hint of perfume on a random Tuesday. The new lacy lingerie set I found shoved in the back of her drawer that I had never seen her wear for me. The time she claimed her team's dinner ran late, yet her Uber receipt, which popped up in our shared email by accident, showed she was across town from the supposed restaurant. Each detail was a puzzle piece clicking into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. My approach to problem solving has always been methodical. At work, if a system shows irregular behavior, I gather data before drawing conclusions. I decided to apply the same logic here. I didn't want to be the jealous husband who jumped to accusations over circumstantial evidence. So I started quietly collecting anomalies. I noted the nights she was working late and cross-referenced them with our home's smart thermostat activity logs, something only a tech geek like me would think to do. The thermostat has a motion sensor and kept records of when it detected movement. On 2 of the nights, Marina swore she was at the office until 1 a.m. The thermostat logged movement in our living room around 11 p.m. and again near midnight. I hadn't been home those nights. I'd been away on a short business trip one time, and the other I'd gone to bed early upstairs. Someone was in our house, moving around at times that didn't align with her story. Someone, or perhaps 2 people. I felt a cold wave of nausea as that implication hit. It was still just a theory, but I couldn't ignore it. I remember sitting at my home office desk, staring at the thermostat logs with a shaking hand on the mouse. My rational mind warred with my denial. Could it be a pet or a system glitch? No, we have no pets, and the system was reliable. Could she have come home with a friend to pick something up? At midnight? Unlikely without mentioning it. The data suggested she wasn't where she said she was, and worse, might have brought someone into our home while I was away. One Friday evening, The uneasy feeling grew too strong to ignore. Marina was getting ready to meet a client for dinner. Another sudden plan that she swore was a work obligation. She donned a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, one I'd bought her for our date nights, now seemingly repurposed for business. I watched from the bedroom door as she applied perfume, the expensive kind I gave her last Christmas. My chest tightened. "You look nice," I said casually, leaning against the frame. She startled slightly, as if caught off guard in her own vanity mirror. "Oh, thanks," she replied, forcing a smile. "It's a big client. Have to look professional." Her tone was breezy, but the way she fiddled with her earring gave her away. Marina always fidgets with jewelry when she's hiding something, an old tic I remembered from years ago when she planned a surprise birthday party for me. Only now it felt like that nervousness signaled a betrayal rather than a sweet secret. I stepped forward, gently adjusting the necklace around her neck. I could feel her pulse quicken under my fingertips. "Want me to drive you?" I offered. "It's downtown, right?" She immediately shook her head. No, I'll take an Uber. Parking downtown is a nightmare." Another lie. Her office was downtown, yes, but she wasn't headed there. I'd checked our shared calendar, which she apparently forgot I had access to, earlier that day, and saw no mention of any client dinner. In fact, she had marked gym on the calendar for this evening. Yet here she was, dressed far too nicely for a treadmill. The discrepancy made my blood run cold, but I kept my face neutral. "All right," I replied softly, placing a light kiss on her cheek. "Be safe. I'll probably be tinkering in the garage when you get back." She looked relieved that I didn't press further. "Will do. Don't wait up. It might go late," she said, grabbing her purse. With one last weak smile, she left. I stood by the window in our dark living room, peeking through a slit in the curtains as her rideshare arrived. She got in, and the car drove off. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a molar. Suspicion was no longer a vague notion. It was a tangible presence in the room, suffocating me. I needed to know the truth, however painful it might be. And the logical part of my brain was already formulating a plan to obtain it. That night, I discovered my wife's affair through a method only someone like me might employ. A novel, tech-savvy trap that unfolded almost by accident. After Marina left, I retreated to my workspace in the garage, a sanctuary cluttered with servers, routers, and gadgets from my various side projects. If she was lying to me, I wanted concrete proof. Hard data. The old adage echoed in my mind: trust, but verify. I was done trusting blindly. It was time to verify. I sat at my computer and accessed our home network's admin panel. Months ago, I had set up a custom script on our Wi-Fi router to log all connected devices and their activity. It started as a hobby project for network security, monitoring for any unauthorized devices trying to piggyback on our Wi-Fi. Now I had a new use for it. If Marina had brought someone into our home while I was away, maybe that person's phone had unknowingly connected to our Wi-Fi, as phones often auto-join any network they've used before. It was a long shot, but I eagerly opened the logs. Scrolling through lines of data, I filtered for devices I didn't recognize. There, a device ID that wasn't mine, hers, or any of our known gadgets. A generic smartphone label, something like Android device 1243, appeared on 2 dates that immediately caught my attention. The same 2 nights I'd been out of town, and the thermostat recorded movement late at night. This unknown device had connected to our Wi-Fi for a couple of hours on those nights. My heart pounded. Someone had been in our house, comfortable enough to connect to the Wi-Fi, perhaps automatically if Marina gave them the password or if they'd been there before. I cross-referenced the device's MAC address with some online databases and recognized the manufacturer, Samsung. Neither Marina nor I use Samsung phones. We're both iPhone users. Whoever owned this device likely was her lover. It felt surreal that I was conducting digital forensics on my own marriage, but the data was clear and damning. Still, I wanted more direct evidence of the affair itself. If I confronted her now with just network logs, she could feign ignorance or make excuses. I needed something incontrovertible. That's when I remembered the doorbell camera. We have a video doorbell installed for security, which records motion at our front door. Marina knew about it, of course, but she also knew I rarely checked it unless we got a delivery or a notification. However, if the lover was brazen enough to come into our home, there might be footage. I opened the doorbell app with trembling fingers and scoured the saved motion events from the nights in question. There, one clip is tagged around 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, the week I was away. I hit play and watched. The camera's night vision view showed our front porch light turning on. The door opened, and I saw Marina stepping outside, looking down the street, then motioning with her hand. A moment later, a man appeared on screen, walking up the driveway toward her. The angle was from the side, and the image was grainy in the dark, but I could make out enough. Medium build, wearing a light-colored shirt, and carrying what looked like a bottle of wine. Marina took his arm and pulled him quickly into the house, glancing once over her shoulder, directly into the camera, before shutting the door. The whole clip was maybe 15 seconds, but it confirmed everything I feared. She had brought another man into our home, into our bedroom presumably, when I wasn't there. And the way she looked at him, the familiarity in her touch, it shattered me. I had to pause the video and catch my breath. My hands were ice cold, my body numb. In the silence of the garage, I could hear the rapid thump of my heart in my ears. I pressed play on the next motion event, time-stamped a couple hours later. The door opened again around 1 a.m. The same man slipped out, and a second later Marina appeared on the threshold, wearing only a robe, her hair messy. She leaned against the doorframe, and they kissed, long and deep, before he jogged off into the night. She stood there watching until he disappeared from the camera's view, a dreamy smile on her face. Then she went back inside, and the door closed. I was glad I hadn't eaten dinner. I might have vomited. My stomach churned with a mix of rage and humiliation. There it was, the truth, captured in infrared and saved on a cloud server. Not only was my wife unfaithful, she had the audacity to conduct her affair in our marital home, the one place I always felt safest. And by the ease of their interactions, it wasn't a one-time mistake. It looked like a well-rehearsed routine. I should have been emotional, screaming, crying, something, but a strange calm washed over me instead. It was the calm of certainty, I suppose. The unknown, that torturous limbo of suspicion, had solidified into a cold, hard fact. And with that certainty came resolve. An analytical voice in my mind spoke up. Okay, she's cheating. Now what are you going to do about it? I transferred the video clips and router logs to a secure folder on my computer, duplicating them onto an encrypted USB drive as well. Evidence, I thought, like a detective sealing items in plastic baggies. I remember looking at the USB drive in my palm, the tiny device feeling heavier than a brick. On it sat the ruin of my marriage in zeros and ones. Yet I wasn't even close to done. The method of discovery itself had been novel, digital footprints and a doorbell camera, rather than a dramatic catch in the act. But now I needed more context. Who was this man who had strolled so confidently into my home? How long had this been going on? Why? The why, surprisingly, didn't consume me as much as one might think. I wasn't agonizing over what I did wrong, at least not in that moment. Instead, I was systematically moving to the next phase. Gather all information. In my line of work, when something goes disastrously wrong, say a server breach, you don't waste time crying over it. You initiate an incident response, contain the damage, collect forensic data, understand the scope of the breach. In this scenario, my heart was the server that had been breached, and I intended to respond with the same cold efficiency. I decided to deploy a more proactive surveillance measure. Earlier that evening, when I'd offered to drive her, an idea had sparked. She declined my offer, which meant she'd likely take an Uber or taxi to meet this person. She wouldn't want to risk me noticing our car's mileage or dashcam footage. If I could track where she went tonight, it might lead me right to the lover. I had a spare GPS tracker in my stash of gadgets, a little device originally bought to keep tabs on our car in case of theft. It was magnetic and had a battery that would last a few days. Without hesitation, I grabbed it, slipped on a dark jacket, and headed outside. Marina's car was still in the driveway. The Uber hadn't been gone more than 15 minutes. Acting on adrenaline and paranoia, I quickly slapped the tracker onto the underside of her car's rear bumper. If for some reason she or her lover used her car later, I'd know exactly where it went. It was a contingency plan. Back in my garage command center, I opened the live tracker app and saw the dot representing her car stationary at our address, working as intended. But more immediately useful, I opened the Find My app on my phone. Some time ago, I'd enabled location sharing between us for safety. Marina rarely bothered with tech settings, so she likely forgot it was even on. Sure enough, after a few seconds, the app pulled up her location. A restaurant across town, not downtown as she had said. I clicked the location. It was a trendy bistro in the Arts District. We'd been there together last year on a date. The irony made me clench my jaw. She was at Levant, the little place with great charcuterie and low lighting. Romantic, intimate. Not the kind of scene for a client meeting, but perfect for a secret lover's rendezvous. I couldn't just drive there and confront them. Not yet. Bursting in would satisfy my anger, but it wasn't part of a plan. And I realized at that moment, I was formulating one. A plan more devious and devastating than any spur-of-the-moment blow-up. But first, more data. I set my computer to record her whereabouts via the location share periodically, just a simple script to ping her location every few minutes and log it. I also remembered that we had a family cloud account for our phones, mainly used to share photo storage. If her phone was backing up photos or messages to the cloud, I might get access. I logged into our cloud account online. It prompted for two-factor authentication, which by default would have sent a code to her phone. Obviously a problem. But luck, or rather her oversight, was on my side. Early on, I had set my phone number as the recovery number for her account when I helped her set up a new iPhone. The code came to my phone as an SMS. I typed it in and suddenly, I was inside her digital world. Immediately, I navigated to the cloud backup of her messages. My hands shook visibly on the mouse as I clicked through to her text message logs. A list of contacts appeared. I recognized most of the names, friends, co-workers, family. But one stood out, a string of digits with no saved name, the unsaved number that had texted her late at night. With a deep breath, I clicked it. The messages that loaded made my vision blur with rage, hundreds of them stretching back over 6 months. They weren't nudes or graphic exchanges, thank God for small mercies. Rather, they read like a second relationship playing out in clandestine snippets. Some were mundane, logistics about meeting up, inside jokes from their shared experiences. Others were romantic. Last night was incredible. I can still smell you on my shirt. And the replies from my wife. I can't stop thinking about you. This is dangerous, but I've never felt so alive. Each sentence was a dagger, sliding in between my ribs. Here was my wife, the woman I'd loved and supported, pouring her affection into text bubbles for someone else. She even discussed me in a few of them, referring to me as busy with his own world, or too distracted with work to notice. In one message, the lover asked if she was worried I'd find out, and she responded, "He trusts me completely. He'd never suspect a thing." Sometimes I feel guilty, but then I see you and all that fades. I had to pause and breathe slowly to keep my composure. The cold calm was threatening to crack under the weight of those words. I clicked on a photo icon in the message thread. There were pictures. One was a selfie of Marina and this man cuddled together on a couch. Our living room couch, I realized with a fresh wave of anger. Another was of them at some park, maybe on a hiking trail, smiling like a carefree couple. She looked genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen in a while, which twisted the knife in deeper. They even had a short video clip, Marina filming herself blowing a kiss to the camera with him hugging her from behind, both grinning. It was dated on a weekend I was at a tech conference. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and forced myself to focus. These messages and photos were the smoking gun. I quickly downloaded the entire chat history, saved the photos and videos, and backed everything up to multiple secure locations. In a legal sense, I wasn't sure how much of this was admissible. Some states frown on accessing a spouse's private messages without permission. But I didn't care at this point. This was for me, to know the full scope of her betrayal and to use as leverage if needed. One thing became clear from reading their exchanges. The man's name was Alan, and he was indeed someone from her workplace. He wasn't just a random fling. Their conversation referenced projects, an office retreat, and other colleagues. Digging further, I found messages where she vented about her boss being demanding. Wait, her boss's name was Robert, not Alan. So Alan wasn't her boss, but likely a colleague or subordinate. Then one text from a month ago hit me like a truck. I hate keeping us secret. I wish I could show you off at the next office party, but you know how HR is. We have to be careful until we figure things out. It dawned on me. Alan was likely one of her direct reports or team members. Marina managed a small team of analysts. She'd mentioned their names occasionally. Alan. Yes, there was an Alan she'd spoken of months back, saying she was mentoring him on an important project. She had praised him at the time for being bright and ambitious. Apparently, that mentorship had gone far beyond professional bounds. I also noticed an interesting pattern. Marina often initiated conversations with Alan complaining about me in small ways. He's glued to his computer again. I feel invisible. Or we had a fight about how much time he spends working. It seemed she was partly justifying her affair by painting me as a neglectful husband. That hurt, because I had been working long hours indeed, trying to secure a promotion that would benefit both of us. But I had no idea she felt so lonely. Not that it excused anything. She could have talked to me, suggested counseling, anything other than this. But it showed me the narrative she'd built in her mind. I was the obsessed tech geek husband, emotionally unavailable, and therefore her betrayal was somehow understandable. A story of rationalization. A specific recent text exchange made my blood run colder than all the others. Just last week, Alan wrote, "Can't wait for our trip next month. You deserve a real vacation. No husbands, no work, just us." Marina replied, "I'm counting down the days. Vegas, baby." I told him it's a work conference. He totally bought it. Vegas. A work conference. She had in fact mentioned a potential conference in Las Vegas around next month, but it was never confirmed, and I hadn't thought much of it. Now I saw their plan laid bare. She and Alan were going to fly off for a romantic getaway under the guise of professional development. And I'd have probably wished her good luck and sent her on her way, utterly clueless. I realized with a nauseating certainty that this affair was not slowing down. It was escalating. They were making plans that presumably could lead to her eventually leaving me. The texts didn't outright say that. But phrases like, "until we figure things out," implied an uncertain future for our marriage. Who knows? Maybe she fantasized about running off with him permanently once circumstances allowed. That thought stirred something unexpected in me. Pride. Not pride in her, but in myself. I'd been breaking my back working to provide a great life for us, and here she was ready to throw it away for some fling with a junior colleague. Did she think he could offer her the life I did? The financial security, the home, the support. Perhaps love had made her idealistic or foolish. In any case, it was time to disabuse them both of the notion that I would quietly be cast aside. By the time I looked up from the screen, several hours had passed. It was near midnight. My eyes were dry and burning from staring unblinking at evidence of my wife's infidelity. My hands, however, were steady now as I closed all the files. I had seen enough. I had collected the critical data. The discovery phase was complete, and an outline of a plan had started forming in my head in those dark hours. A plan for revenge that would be as methodical and far-reaching as possible. I left the garage and stepped out into the cool night air in our backyard to clear my head. The stars were out, indifferent to my turmoil. I remember the sensation of standing there barefoot on the cold grass, looking up at the sky and feeling a part of me detach. The naive, loving husband part, the one who was hurt and confused, floated up and away, disappearing among the stars. What remained was a version of me I never knew existed, calculating, ruthless, and singularly focused. In that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would not confront Marina in a tearful, dramatic scene. I would not beg or even ask why. Instead, I would dedicate myself to a strategic takedown of the life she had chosen to demolish. She wanted a world without me in it? Fine. I would show her just how cold and empty that world could be once I was done legally, financially, and socially destroying both her and her lover. The first step of that journey was now behind me. Discovery. I had caught her, not in the act, but in the vast, inescapable net of digital evidence. The next steps would require even more patience and cunning. I allowed myself one last indulgence of emotion. Leaning against our oak tree, in the shadows, I let out a long, trembling breath and then a few silent tears. Not of sorrow, but of mourning. I was mourning the end of the life I thought I had. When I wiped my eyes and stood upright again, I was done mourning. The engineer in me took over completely, already debugging the situation and writing the code of vengeance that would compile into the destruction of two people who so richly deserved it. I went inside and waited in the darkness of our bedroom, feigning sleep. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard Marina come home. I listened as she quietly undressed in the bathroom, likely checking on me to see if I'd stirred. I didn't budge. She slipped into bed, and I could smell the faint trace of a cologne that wasn't mine on her skin. Lying there, eyes closed, I felt nothing but icy resolve. If she had glanced over, she would have only seen her husband gently breathing, seemingly deep in slumber. She had no idea the storm that was brewing behind my closed eyes. The days that followed were a masterclass in meticulous evidence gathering. With the initial shock behind me, I channeled all my energy into documenting every aspect of Marina's affair and preparing for the confrontation that would come, on my terms, at a time of my choosing. If I was going to war, I wanted an arsenal stocked with undeniable proof and strategic advantages. First, I took inventory of what I already had. The video footage from our doorbell cam, check. The network logs showing an unknown device at our home on specific nights, check. The entire text message history between Marina and Alan, including photos and their Vegas plan, big check. This was more than enough to confront her privately, but I intended to wield it in more impactful arenas, like a court of law or the court of public opinion. So everything needed to be authentic, verifiable, and preserved. I purchased a small encrypted external hard drive and created multiple partitions on it, each containing copies of the evidence. One partition had the raw video files from the doorbell and snapshots of the router logs. Another had an export of the text messages. I used a program to convert their chat into a PDF for readability, with timestamps and phone numbers visible. I also saved those incriminating photos and the one video of them together. I made sure to store the original files too, not just exports, in case the authenticity was ever questioned. I wanted the digital fingerprints intact. To further bolster the credibility of the text records, I decided to gather them from another angle. If their affair was as integrated into work life as it seemed, there might be traces on her work communications. Marina's company, like many, used a corporate chat system, Slack, and email. She had a work laptop at home. One morning, after she left for the office, I took a calculated risk. I carefully powered on her work laptop. We knew each other's passwords for personal devices, but I didn't know her work credentials. Still, the machine was logged into Windows and only required a fingerprint scan to wake up, something I obviously didn't have. However, I noticed that her email was set up through the Mail app, which sometimes, if not logged out, will show a preview of recent messages. Sure enough, I wiggled the mouse and was able to see a preview pane of her inbox, which hadn't been closed. I didn't have full access, but I could glean subject lines and first lines of emails. Nothing obvious there, not surprising they wouldn't email about the affair. Slack, on the other hand, was asking for a login. I closed everything and shut down the laptop, deciding not to push my luck with her work systems. Her company likely had IT alerts for failed logins, and I didn't want to tip her off or get her fired prematurely. That could come later, on my terms. Instead, I turned to a tried-and-true method: physical surveillance. If digital footprints were risky to gather beyond what I had, perhaps I should collect physical ones. I thought about hiring a private investigator. This is a common route for cheated spouses. But after researching a few local PIs, I realized two things. One, I already had more evidence than many PIs gather in weeks. And two, involving an outsider risked losing control of the narrative. I didn't want any leaks or missteps. I trusted myself, and only myself, to see this through. So I became my own investigator. I took a few days off from work, using the excuse of burnout and needing a mental health break, which my boss surprisingly accepted with sympathy. I'd rarely taken time off. This allowed me to tail Marina without arousing her suspicion that I'd normally be at the office. Each morning I left the house dressed as if going to work, laptop bag and travel mug in hand. I'd kiss her cheek, a gesture that made my skin crawl now, but I performed it convincingly, and depart. Then I'd swap my car for an old, inconspicuous Honda that I borrowed from a close friend of mine, Eric, who lived across town. I told Eric some of the truth, that I suspected Marina was cheating, and I needed his car to discreetly follow her. He was one of my few confidants, and he offered support and his car without hesitation or prying for details. "Do what you gotta do, man," he said, gripping my shoulder. "Anything you need." I nodded appreciatively, but inside I knew this mission was a solitary one. Still, the car was helpful. Marina would easily spot my electric blue Tesla, but a plain gray sedan like Eric's was invisible. From a block away, I trailed her to work. That first stakeout day, she actually did go straight to the office. I parked where I could see the building's entrance. A couple of times I saw Alan, from photos I'd identified his face, step out for coffee runs. He matched what I saw on the doorbell footage. A man in his early 30s, average height, nondescript business casual clothing. Unremarkable. It boggled my mind that she'd risk everything for this bland nobody. But then again, perhaps that was part of the appeal, an escape from our otherwise orderly life. During lunch, my patience paid off. Instead of eating in the office or nearby as usual, I saw Marina and Alan exit together, hop into his car, and drive off. I followed at a careful distance. They ended up at a park across town, one I knew well. Parking a ways back, I slipped on a baseball cap and sunglasses and tailed them on foot. They found a secluded spot under a tree by the lake, sat on a bench and, well, I got photos of them making out like horny teenagers, hidden behind the cover of some bushes. My hands shook with anger as I snapped pictures using a DSLR camera with a decent zoom that I'd brought along. The betrayal in broad daylight made my blood simmer, but I kept cool enough to document it. Click, click, each shutter snap capturing her infidelity for posterity. They talked, laughed, oblivious to my lens. At one point, Alan produced a small gift bag from his jacket and handed it to her. She opened it and pulled out some item. Looked like jewelry, glinting in the midday sun. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him again, clearly delighted. I got a shot of that too, the joy on her face unmistakable. I recognized that expression. I had put it there myself many times in the past with surprise gifts or kind gestures. Seeing it now fueled my resolve further. After about 40 minutes, they returned to work. I documented the time and details in a little notebook, keeping a log of events as if building a case file. Date, time, location, what happened. Cold, clinical. Over the next week, I gathered more evidence than I actually needed. It became almost mechanical for me. Track her movements, capture interactions, note lies. She told me she was having lunch with a girlfriend on the day I saw her at the park. So I obtained a selfie of them that day and cross-referenced it with the chat logs later. She'd texted me a brief, "Lunch ran long, heading back to work," while at the park with him, which aligned with my timeline perfectly. Another evening, she said she was running errands after work. I followed and watched them meet at a shopping mall parking lot, only to drive together to a motel. That one stung. An hour at a cheap motel off the highway. I couldn't get footage inside, of course, but I filmed them entering together and leaving later, disheveled. It was obvious enough what transpired. I saved that video too, though I doubted I'd need to go that far unless absolutely necessary. It was a delicate balance. living a double life as the watcher while pretending to be the oblivious husband at home. Some nights I found it nearly impossible to lie in bed next to her knowing where she'd been just hours before. But I played my role flawlessly. In fact, I began to be more attentive at home in a subtle, strategic way. I didn't want to tip her off that anything was wrong. Quite the opposite. I wanted her comfortable, thinking she was getting away with it. So I engaged in pleasant small talk, asked about her day, listening to her smoothly mixed truth and lies without batting an eye. Even offered foot rubs after her tiring day. Each time she looked almost guilty, accepting, perhaps a flicker of conscience, but then she'd relax, likely believing I was truly ignorant. I recall one particular night, a Friday. She had spent the afternoon at a client site, in reality with Alan at his apartment. I had tailed them there and watched her walk into his place hand in hand. That evening I cooked her favorite meal, spinach lasagna, and opened a nice bottle of wine. I needed to keep up the charade, yes, but part of me also wanted to observe her, to see if I could detect any remorse or telltale sign on her face. Over dinner, she was a bit quiet, perhaps thoughtful. As we clinked glasses, she said softly, "You know, I really appreciate you doing this, cooking and just being you." I smiled gently and shrugged. "I just want you to be happy. You seem stressed lately with work and everything. I figured a nice night in would help." Her eyes glistened unexpectedly, and for a second I felt a pang. Was that guilt surfacing? I am happy," she stammered, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "You're so good to me, always." I squeezed back, swallowing the bile of hypocrisy. "We're good to each other. That's what partners do." The double meaning of my words was bitter on my tongue. She was good to me only in pretense now, but I said it anyway. She lowered her gaze, and I wondered if she was on the verge of confessing. There was a tension in the air, like she might be gathering courage to speak. My heart thudded. Part of me almost wanted her to, just to put an end to the facade. If she confessed in that moment, how would I react? Would I drop the act and unleash what I knew, or feign surprise and heartbreak? I didn't have to find out. After a pause, she simply squeezed my hand again, forced a smile, and said, "I'm lucky to have you." Damn right, I thought with an inner sneer. But outwardly, I just nodded and resumed eating. Her confession, if any, died in her throat. Likely, she rationalized it away, the same way her texts had shown. He's happy. He doesn't suspect. Why hurt him unnecessarily? Perhaps in her mind, continuing to lie was an act of mercy. If so, she was profoundly mistaken about what mercy meant. By the end of that week, I had an overwhelming catalog of her misconduct. Dates and times of meetups with Alan, complete with photographic evidence. The park kissing, the motel rendezvous, a makeout in his car outside her gym, etc. Financial proof. I checked our joint bank account statements and credit cards more carefully. Sure enough, there were charges that aligned with their activities. Meals at restaurants I'd never been to, and she had said were client meals. Hotel charges masked as generic billing. But I cross-checked the address, and it was that motel's parent company. And even a fairly expensive jewelry store purchase. That must have been the gift I saw him give her in the park. It was bought with her credit card, so either she bought it for herself to pretend it was from him, or she bought something for him. Neither made much sense. Likely he used her card or cash to avoid his own records showing it, or she treated him. Regardless, it was a trace. I quietly moved half the money from our main joint checking into an account solely in my name, leaving enough that routine expenses would still clear. I also started keeping copies of these statements as evidence of dissipation of marital assets, something I'd read about. If one spouse spends money on an affair, a divorce judge can consider reimbursing the betrayed spouse. Check. The prenup. More on that soon. I retrieved the prenuptial agreement from our safe deposit box on one of my days off. It was like reading a prophecy. We had signed it before marriage at my insistence. I had some assets from stock options even then. It included an infidelity clause, which our lawyers said might not hold weight in some states but is often persuasive. The clause essentially said if one spouse is proven to have committed adultery, the other gets a larger share of marital assets or predetermined compensation, and the cheating spouse forfeits any claim to alimony. Marina had lightly joked I was paranoid when we signed it, but she understood it was mostly about financial security and trust. Now, that document felt like a loaded weapon in my hand. If enforced, it meant she'd walk away with a pittance compared to what she might otherwise get. Even if not ironclad legally, it gave me leverage to enforce a quick, lopsided settlement in my favor. Because the last thing she'd want is a public court battle dragging her adultery into the open. Correspondence. I quietly let some time pass to see if any further plans surfaced about their Vegas trip. Sure enough, one evening I spotted an email on her phone preview as she flipped through her Gmail app in front of me casually, from an airline, confirming 2 tickets to Las Vegas for next month. She didn't mention it to me yet, probably waiting until closer, or maybe planning to go without telling me at all, claiming it last minute. I made a mental note of the dates. This would be crucial for timing my endgame. The more evidence I compiled, the more I noticed a shift in my own emotional state. I had started as a man devastated by betrayal, running on adrenaline and anger. But as I built my case, I felt increasingly detached, almost like a scientist observing a specimen. Marina's lies and Alan's existence became data points, variables in an equation I was solving. I began to sleep better at night, oddly, because I had a sense of control. Every late-night whisper or early morning texting session from her side of the bed no longer filled me with anxiety. I simply logged it mentally for later. I even planted a tiny audio recorder under the driver's seat of her car, another gadget from an old project, to catch any conversations they might have while driving. That one yielded a goldmine. 2 days later, I recovered the recorder and found it had captured a 20-minute conversation as they drove after work, apparently to yet another secret tryst. They spoke freely in her car. In the recording, Marina and Alan laughed about keeping their story straight for the Vegas trip. At one point, Alan asked, "Do you ever feel bad about lying to him?" And her response, in a quiet voice, was, "I do. Sometimes. He's a good man, but I was so empty before, and you make me feel alive. I just can't give you up." Alan then asked, "What are you going to do if he finds out?" And she answered, "He won't. He trusts me completely. By the time anything changes, it will be too late to matter." That ominous, cryptic line, "by the time anything changes," stuck with me. Was she planning to eventually leave me when the time was right for her? Perhaps after Vegas, or after some big event at my job or hers. It sounded like she was hedging her bets, staying until maybe she could take a share of something, or until she was sure with Alan. Regardless, hearing her voice as she discussed me so callously was like listening to a stranger. Oddly, it just strengthened my resolve further. Any lingering sentimentality I had for her was vaporized by those cold words on tape. She was effectively saying I was a non-factor, a dupe to be managed until she made her move. Fine. She had set a timeline in her head. She had no idea I had my own countdown running. and mine would hit zero well before hers. Before I could move to the next phase, I had to be absolutely sure I hadn't missed anything and that I was legally and financially ready. So I turned my attention to the strategic legal maneuvers I needed to execute. The evidence gathering was nearly complete. It was time to prepare the ground for battle. One evening, when Marina was out with friends, the quotes in my mind were permanent by now. She was with Alan, I confirmed via her location. I sat down and meticulously organized a dossier. It was almost funny in a dark way. I made a PowerPoint presentation. Yes, like a true tech professional, I compiled the key pieces into slides. Timelines of her lies versus actual locations. Photos of her with him. Excerpts of incriminating texts. Even a chart showing money spent on affair-related activities. It was labeled Exhibit A, B, C, etc. If I ever needed to present it, to a lawyer or to her or to anyone, I could do so clearly and systematically. This exercise wasn't strictly necessary, but it helped me mentally cement just how thorough I'd been. It was like rehearsing for a product launch, except the product was vengeance. By the time I finished gathering evidence, I had enough to pulverize her in a divorce, ruin her reputation among friends and colleagues, and put a serious dent in Alan's life too. But raw evidence wasn't enough. I needed to leverage it properly, and that required careful planning on the legal and financial front, which I was now ready to tackle. With a trove of evidence in hand, I embarked on the next critical phase: strategic legal maneuvers to protect myself and set up the destruction of her and her lover in a lawful, financially devastating way. While a part of me wanted to burn their world down in a fiery spectacle, I knew that doing so within the bounds of the law would not only be safer for me, but far more ruinous for them in the long run. Legal victories carry an air of irrevocability. Court orders, financial judgments, public records. I wanted those on my side. The first order of business was finding the right divorce attorney. Not just any attorney, but someone cunning and aggressive enough to match my own determination. Quietly, I began to research top-rated divorce lawyers in our area, focusing on those known for handling high-asset cases and being particularly ruthless when adultery is involved. One name, Patricia Klein, came up repeatedly in reviews and even in a news article about a high-profile divorce where the cheating husband got taken to the cleaners. That sounded perfect. During one of my mental health days off work, I scheduled a consultation with Patricia. To avoid any possible way for Marina to catch on, I did this on a morning when Marina had already left for work, and I told my office I'd be in late, due to a personal appointment. I met the lawyer at her downtown office, a sleek high-rise with tinted glass windows that reflected the steel-gray sky. I remember looking at myself in the mirror of the elevator on the way up. I looked calm, composed, perhaps a bit cold. That was good. I needed to present this as a rational preparation, not an emotional breakdown. Patricia was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a reputation for being a shark. After some brief pleasantries, I cut right to the chase. "My wife is having an affair," I stated flatly. "I have proof, and I want a divorce that leaves her with nothing more than she deserves." The corner of Patricia's mouth twitched in something like the shadow of a grin. "Adultery, you say? And you have proof?" she asked, steepling her fingers. I handed her a neatly prepared summary packet I'd made, pictures and key evidence points included. She took her time flipping through, occasionally nodding. "This is thorough," she admitted, raising an eyebrow. "I'm a thorough kind of person," I replied. "I work in tech. I collect data." That got a slight chuckle out of her. "Well, with this kind of evidence, you certainly have the upper hand. Now let's discuss strategy. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the kind of predatory glint I imagined a shark would have. Over the next hour, we formulated a plan. Key points: prenup enforcement. I told her about our prenup and the infidelity clause. She reviewed a copy. I had brought one. This clause might not be ironclad in court, she mused, but it's leverage. If she has any sense, she won't want this to go to a public trial where all this dirty laundry comes out. We can likely get her to agree to a settlement close to what the prenup dictates, maybe even more in your favor, by threatening to invoke this clause and present all this evidence to enforce it. In our state, infidelity could influence spousal support decisions too. Patricia confirmed that judges generally don't look kindly on a cheating spouse seeking alimony, especially if the other spouse can prove marital funds were spent on the affair. So that angle was strong: asset shielding. I asked about securing my assets immediately. We had a joint savings and checking, plus our house, retirement accounts, and my stock portfolio from work. She advised that since I had already moved some money, I told her I did. She approved. I should avoid any drastic moves that could be seen as hiding assets beyond my share. Instead, she said once divorce is filed, there are typically automatic temporary orders that prevent moving money. So my proactive partial withdrawal was smart. I had a war chest if needed for legal fees and such that she couldn't touch. For the house, she said, since I bought it before marriage. I did, though we both had lived and paid towards mortgage after marriage. It was likely mostly considered separate property due to the prenup's terms, but there might be some marital equity. Regardless, her cheating could help lean that division my way or allow me to buy out her small share cheaply during settlement. Timing. This was crucial. Patricia recommended filing the divorce petition quietly and having it ready to serve in a manner that gave me advantage. For example, serve her at a moment that catches her off guard and perhaps embarrasses her. I had my own ideas brewing there. I mentioned the upcoming Vegas trip they planned. Patricia's eyebrow arched again when I detailed that. If you want maximum drama, she said slowly, one could, say, serve her at the airport or upon return, or even serve him as well if you pursue a civil action against him. That raised a point. Our state didn't have alienation of affection lawsuits. Only a few states do, and not ours. So I couldn't sue Alan for damages in that old-fashioned sense. But if I really wanted to mess with him legally, there was one angle. If his relationship with my wife violated any workplace policies, or if he had any legal vulnerabilities, for instance, if they did anything that could be seen as workplace harassment, or if he misused company time resources for the affair, I could potentially report that. However, that would come later in the social ruin phase. Legally, my main target was the divorce. However, Patricia did suggest if I had evidence of them using marital assets, like money or property, for the affair, I could potentially file a civil claim for dissipation of assets to recoup those. She looked at the list of expenses I compiled. These dinner dates and hotel stays, alone they're not huge, but it's the principle and they add up. We could ask that the cost of the affair be subtracted from her share of assets as compensation to you. I nodded, liking that idea. Make her literally pay for it, I murmured. Exactly. We also discussed custody. We had no children, thank heavens. I silently thanked any deity listening that we'd been too busy or not ready yet for kids. It made this so much cleaner. So custody wasn't an issue, just the division of assets and potential alimony. Alimony was unlikely, given we both worked and made decent money, and especially unlikely if I proved adultery. In some states, adultery can outright bar alimony for the cheater. She confirmed ours was one of those states. That was a relief. Imagine paying her monthly after this. Not on my watch. Before leaving, I asked Patricia pointedly, I want to absolutely ruin her and her lover, but I want to do it legally. What about exposing them? Can that backfire on me legally in any way? Defamation, invasion of privacy, anything I should worry about if I, say, share this evidence with others? Patricia gave a thin smile. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. If what you share is true and provable, they have no case. Invasion of privacy could be a concern if you, for example, shared explicit images of them not meant for public. But you mostly have public sightings, texts that she technically shared with you through the cloud, which is a gray area but unlikely to be pursued, and so on. As long as you don't do something like hack his accounts or physically threaten them, you're fine. And when divorce filings happen, adultery evidence can become part of the public record unless sealed, so it's not private. She paused, then added, however, there is strategic timing in revealing things. Sometimes it's wise to hold back until certain proceedings are underway, to keep them off balance. I understood. I wasn't going to just blast everything out impulsively. I had to curate their downfall for maximum effect. Before I left, we went over fees and such. I wrote her a retainer check from my personal account, one I'd moved funds into, and formally hired her. We agreed that we'd finalize the petition paperwork with all necessary evidence attached in the coming week, but hold off on filing until I gave the go-ahead. I wanted to control the moment she got served, perhaps time it with other blows. One more thing Patricia said as I was walking out. Be sure to secure any valuables or personal items that you wouldn't want broken or taken once she's served. If things get ugly, people can react unpredictably. That was a fair point. In the coming days, I discreetly started moving certain important items out of the house. I got a small storage unit and put my gaming PC, didn't want it smashed in rage, some family heirlooms, important documents, for example, my birth certificate, our marriage certificate, ironically, etc. There. I left most things as they were for now, but anything truly irreplaceable or sensitive, I stashed away. Next, I turned attention to financial maneuvering beyond just freezing her out. I made an appointment with our financial advisor under the pretense of routine check-in, but went alone. I informed him, confidentially, that a divorce was imminent and that I needed advice on protecting my interests. He suggested a few things. Ensure that any joint accounts require both signatures for large withdrawals. We set that up under guise of security. Make no large purchases or changes that could complicate asset picture until the divorce is settled, like don't buy a new car or something. He also recommended I obtain a credit report to see if there were any unknown debts or credit lines, just in case. I did that. No surprises, thankfully. I also quietly changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance and 401k from her to my sister. Temporarily, one can always change later. It's a morbid thought, but I didn't want her to remain my beneficiary even for the interim period. No free money for her if I got hit by a bus before divorce final. That's the level of spite I was operating at, I suppose. Another legal tool I considered. A restraining order or some injunction if things went haywire at serving time. That might be overkill unless she reacted violently or tried to trash the house. I doubted it. Marina's not physically violent, and she's frankly too concerned about appearances to do something dramatic like that. Still, I mentally filed that away as a possible tool if needed. One interesting maneuver Patricia and I discussed was the idea of getting Alan entangled legally. While I couldn't sue him easily, one thought was to subpoena him in the divorce case as a witness, which would scare the hell out of both of them, because it would drag his name into public record, and maybe require him to give a deposition about the affair. The mere prospect of that might pressure Marina to settle quickly and quietly to avoid his involvement or embarrassment. We kept that arrow in the quiver. There was also the notion of informing his wife, if he had one or girlfriend, etc. My intel from their texts suggested Alan was single. He mentioned a past ex but no current partner, and he seemed to live alone from what I saw. So there was no parallel family to blow up on his side, unfortunately. But that meant in some ways he had less to lose privately, though his job and reputation were still vulnerabilities. Speaking of his job, I researched their company. It's a medium tech firm, not huge but not tiny. I found their employee handbook online. Many companies publish them or employee leaks them on forums. It indeed had a section about interpersonal relationships. Disclosure required if a manager is dating a direct report, anti-nepotism, and a code of conduct about not using company resources for personal activities, etc. Both Alan and Marina were in violation of at least the relationship disclosure part, since she was effectively his manager or project lead. That could be dynamite if delivered to the right hands. But I had to time that move carefully. If I leaked it too soon, she might lose her job before I want her to. I honestly didn't want her to lose her income until after settlement, because ironically, if she lost her job while still married to me, she could claim need for alimony, though the affair evidence would likely override. But still. Also, if she got wind of an investigation at work, she might suspect I was onto her. So I bided my time on that front. But I did prepare an anonymous package, an envelope with copies of a couple of choice photos of them canoodling in the park, clear enough to identify them, and a succinct letter to her company's HR director outlining that a manager, her, was in a covert relationship with her subordinate, Alan, including meeting on company time. I had dates/times which were during business hours from my observations, and using company off-site meeting as cover for personal rendezvous. I didn't send it yet. I just kept it ready. Likewise, I prepared a similar package addressed to the CEO and the board, just to escalate if needed. Overkill, perhaps, but I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned in holding them accountable. One night, as I reviewed my legal game plan, I glanced over at Marina sleeping and had a thought. What if I just confronted her now? Skip all the pomp and circumstance, just show her the evidence and see what she does. Part of me longed for that emotional release. The shouting, the crying, the raw confrontation where I could tell her how deeply she hurt me. But I shut that down quickly. That's not how this story was going to go. She opted to handle things with deceit and betrayal. I would handle things with calculation and consequences. No yelling, no pleading. Those were luxuries for people who hadn't planned ahead. I was already steps beyond that. Still, I knew at some point I'd have to talk to her directly, if only to say my piece after the trap was sprung. I imagined that conversation over and over in my head, each time deciding on more scathing yet controlled remarks, the tone I'd use, the look I'd give her. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I would be ice. Within 2 weeks of discovering the affair, I had moved from devastation to a fully realized legal warfare plan. Everything was lined up. My lawyer ready to file and serve at my signal, my finances arranged for minimal collateral damage, evidence secured and organized, and an array of bombs I could set off in their world. Legal, financial, professional, social. It felt empowering in a dark way. Now, it was time to set the stage for the emotional manipulation segment of my plan. As much as I wanted to smash the whole edifice now, I recognized that a bit more patience and manipulation could yield even better results. I needed Marina to walk unsuspecting into the minefield I'd laid, and perhaps even make choices that would further condemn her. So I moved into the next phase, playing the loving, ignorant husband a little longer, and subtly steering her towards scenarios that would amplify her downfall. I had to be careful. The closer I got to execution, the higher the risk of tipping my hand. But I had learned something from the evidence I gathered. Both of them were overconfident and thought I was a fool. They weren't on guard at all. I could use that. It was time to employ some emotional manipulation of my own, to lull her deeper into a false sense of security, and maybe set up some final acts in this twisted play before the curtains fell. Maintaining my facade as the oblivious, loving husband in the face of such betrayal was one of the greatest acting challenges of my life. Yet, it was crucial for the plan. I needed to emotionally manipulate the manipulators, turn the tables by feigning reconciliation, vulnerability, even ignorance, so that when I struck, it would be from the blind side, utterly unexpected. To do this, I orchestrated a series of calculated emotional beats, almost like writing a script for a play where I was both actor and director. The goal was to ensure that Marina, and by extension Alan, remained completely unsuspecting, and maybe even a bit guilty or conflicted, so that she wouldn't take any preemptive actions like moving money or confiding in someone who might warn her. I wanted her feeling secure with Plan A, affair humming along, me in the dark, and simultaneously too empathetic or cowardly to initiate any change herself. About 3 weeks after discovering the affair, with my legal prep all but done, I staged a late-night conversation with her. I chose a night when she hadn't been out with him and seemed relatively relaxed at home. After dinner, I appeared a bit quiet and thoughtful. She noticed. "Hey," she asked softly as we sat on the couch watching a show. "You okay? You seem distant." I had practiced this in my head. I took a breath, turned off the TV and said, "I have been feeling a bit off lately. Work stress, I guess. And maybe I realized I've been distant." I looked at her with what I hoped passed for a mixture of sadness and love. It just hit me that we haven't spent much time together lately. I've been so buried in work and you've been so busy. I miss us. Her face registered surprise, then something like relief or guilt. It's hard to say. "Oh," she murmured, clearly not expecting that. I soldiered on. "I just want you to know, if I've been checked out or hard to reach, I'm sorry. You're the most important thing in my life, and sometimes I take that for granted." I gently took her hand. I almost wanted to scream from the irony, but I held it together. "I love you, Marina. Maybe I don't say it enough or show it enough, but I do. And if you've felt lonely or like I'm not present, I want to fix that." I watched her eyes fill with tears. Tears of guilt, perhaps, because everything I said was true from my perspective. But she was the one betraying, not me. She threw her arms around me in a tight hug. I felt her trembling. Then she started crying, soft, muffled sobs into my shoulder. Bingo, I thought. Out loud, I stroked her hair and said, "Shh, it's okay. I'm here. Talk to me. What's wrong?" She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've just been stressed too, and I feel guilty that I didn't notice you were feeling this way. I should have reached out as well." It was a half-truth at best. She likely felt guilty for a lot more than that. But I allowed her to frame it in the innocuous way. "We both got caught up in stuff, I guess. But we'll do better, right? We'll make time." I smiled softly and added a deliberate line. "No matter how busy life gets or what distractions come up, we have to put each other first." She nodded, tears still shining. Yes, yes, you're right. In that moment, she probably felt like absolute scum, which she should. But importantly, she also likely believed that I was not suspicious of the affair at all, that instead I was looking inward, blaming myself for any distance. This served two purposes. It made her drop any guard if she had one, and it made her think twice about hurting me further in the immediate future, because seeing me so earnest and vulnerable might stir her conscience. If I could delay or deter any plans she and Alan had for her to leave me on their own terms, that was good. I wanted to control the timing entirely. Following that talk, I made good on my promise of making time, or at least I acted like a husband in reconciliation mode. I suggested we do a date night that weekend, something fancy. She looked astonished, since in her mind, I went from potentially neglectful to suddenly romantic. Maybe she thought the talk ignited some revelation in me. She readily agreed. I made reservations at a high-end restaurant we hadn't tried yet. I told her to wear something nice. She did, and ironically, it was a dress I suspected she had previously worn for him. No matter. That date night, I went all out being charming, attentive, reminiscing about our early days. I even brought up how we met and some fun memories, to really wallop her conscience. She responded in kind, albeit with a noticeable tension behind her smile. She probably was wrestling with the knowledge that she was cheating on me while I was here being Prince Charming. Good. Let that guilt marinate, I thought. Even if it wouldn't stop her ultimately, it might make her sloppy or hesitant. Crucially, during dinner, I tested something. I gently probed about her supposed upcoming conference, the Vegas trip lie. I said, "So that conference in Vegas you mentioned a while back, do you know if you're definitely going? If you are, maybe I could take a few days off and join you at least for the weekend portion. We could catch a show or something in the evenings." I said it with an upbeat, hopeful tone. Her face froze for just a second. Deer in headlights. Then she recovered, nervously laughing. "Oh, it's not 100% confirmed I'll go. And if I do, it's really just work, honey. Lots of workshops and networking. I'd barely see you." She sipped her wine to avoid my eyes. I leaned in a bit, lowering my voice sympathetically. "I know. It's okay. It was just a thought. If it's all work, maybe I'll skip. But if you want company or help de-stressing after sessions, I wouldn't mind flying out. I have plenty of miles." I wanted to see how she'd react under this pressure. She looked genuinely flustered. "That's sweet, but you really don't have to. If I end up going, it'll be fine. Besides, you can use the time to focus on your own projects, right?" She tried to smile. I dropped it with a shrug and a warm smile. "Sure, just keep me posted. Was just thinking it'd be fun to get away together if it worked out." Inside, I was pleased. She was clearly panicking at the thought of me popping up in Vegas. Maybe she'd even call off that trip now to avoid risk, which would be an interesting twist, but likely not. More likely she'd just double down on making sure I was nowhere near it. Fine by me, because I had no intention of actually going. I just wanted that seed of worry planted. Up to now, I was Mr. Loving, but I planned one moment where I'd allow myself an outburst, not of knowing about the affair, but something smaller, to see her reaction and also create a particular impression. It came a week later. I accidentally discovered, or so she thought, an expense in our credit card for a hotel. It was a charge from a billing I recognized as that motel they used, but it wasn't obvious on the statement. I deliberately confronted her somewhat tersely about it. "Hey, do you know what this $200 charge is from Greenfield Enterprises?" We were at home after work when I brought it up. I saw her eyes dart, recognizing it, but she quickly lied. Oh, that. Yes, that was actually me. I booked a spa day package at the Greenfield Spa with a friend last month, and that's how it shows up on the bill. Sorry, I forgot to mention it. I stared at her for a moment, acting unconvinced. Greenfield Spa? Why wouldn't it just say that? She bristled slightly, doubling down. I think the spa is inside a resort or something, hence the generic billing company name. I can check if you want. I reluctantly let it go, but I added a touch of an outburst. I sighed and said with a hint of hurt, "It's just, you didn't tell me and I was worried it might be fraud or something. I don't like financial surprises, you know, especially since we're trying to communicate better." She apologized. "You're right. I'm sorry. I should have told you I went. I just forgot. It was nothing. Just a girl's thing." I acted a bit moody for the rest of that evening, as if the trust had been dinged slightly. I wasn't overtly angry, just a little colder. Why did I do this? Because I wanted her to feel that I still basically trusted her, since I accepted her explanation, but also that I was watchful about finances. It might discourage her from doing anything too extreme financially, and it also set the stage that I was not a total doormat. Even the most trusting husband can show irritation at hidden expenses. This minor conflict was resolved the next day by my forgiving her and bringing home takeout for dinner as a peace offering, acting like I felt bad for overreacting. She, eager to smooth things over, was affectionate and sweet, all part of the push and pull to keep her emotionally on her toes, but still unassuming about the big picture. A particularly daring move on my part was to interact with her lover socially without letting on, I knew. It so happened that one Friday, her company had an open invite social hour at a pub. I learned of this through their Slack, which I still had occasional peeks at, and she casually mentioned she might go. Spouses sometimes attended. I said, "Let's go together. I'd love to meet more of your coworkers." She looked surprised but couldn't come up with a reason to refuse without seeming odd. So we went. And there I met Alan, introduced to me by my own wife with a perfectly straight face as just a colleague. "This is my husband," she said, maybe a slight tremor in her voice, but she hid it well. Alan, to his credit, also played it cool. I shook his hand, looking him right in the eye, feeling an almost cinematic surreality. Here I was, face to face with the man sleeping with my wife. He looked ordinary, a bit nervous maybe because, well, I'm sure she informed him I knew nothing, but it's always a tense scenario. I gave no sign of anything amiss. In fact, I even engaged him in small talk. "Marina tells me you're one of her brightest team members. She really enjoys working with you." I watched them both react to that. It was almost comical, her slight widen of eyes like, "Did I say that?" and him with a forced, modest chuckle. This subtle psychological game was my way of saying indirectly, "I see you, I know you," but not in a way they could call out. It likely unnerved them a bit. I also noticed during the pub night that they kept a polite distance naturally. They didn't chat much directly in front of me, obviously. At one point, though, when I was talking to someone else, I spied her glancing at him across the room with an expression I read as worried or pensive. Good. Let that anxiety stew. To really drive it home as we were leaving the event, I even said goodbye to him specifically. "Great to meet you, Alan. I've heard a lot about you." I stressed that last part just a tad. "Maybe we should double date sometime if you have a girlfriend." He stammered that he was single. I smiled. "Ah, well, perhaps we'll see you around at the next team thing. Take care." My wife was quiet on the ride home, perhaps wondering if I suspected something, but I kept my demeanor genial and even complimented her, Your coworkers are nice. Alan seemed pleasant. I saw her grip on the wheel ease a bit, as I casually complimented the very man I despised. Inside, I was seething, of course. The urge to punch him was real, but the satisfaction of watching them squirm internally was enough for that night. They'd lost some composure while I maintained mine, and that was a kind of psychological victory. All these manipulations served to position me as utterly clueless and loving. So when the hammer would drop, it would be a complete shock. I also suspect my display of love and apparent recommitment may have weighed on Marina. She and Alan still carried on. The texts I saw later that week indicated they gossiped about the pub night. She wrote, "That was so nerve-wracking. I hate lying to his face, but I think he really doesn't know." Alan replied, "He seems like a nice guy. I feel a bit guilty, but we'll get through this." I screenshot those too. The irony of them feeling I was the obstacle to get through enraged me anew, but at least I confirmed their perspective. I noticed a slight dial-back in their meetings after the heart-to-heart and the pub night. Perhaps she was trying to cool it a bit out of guilt, or just being cautious. They still met, but maybe once a week instead of 3 times. I didn't mind. I already had plenty of evidence, and my timeline to strike was approaching anyway. The controlled outburst portion might also include the actual confrontation scene, but I intended for that to be more of a revelation than an outburst. I had to plan exactly how I'd reveal to her that I knew and was enacting revenge. Would I do it intimately? Just us? Publicly? In a letter? There were choices. I leaned toward a dramatic yet controlled reveal in front of a small audience, like her parents or something. Haven't decided yet at that point. But I was getting close. As the days ticked by, I coordinated with Patricia, my lawyer, to finalize paperwork. I signed the divorce petition, and we had copies of all evidence to attach under seal, to be used if needed. We prepared a summons for her and arranged a process server. I instructed the server to be ready on a certain day that I would confirm. Everything was cocked and loaded. Now it was time to plan the final sequence of destruction, the coordinated execution of my revenge, reputation and social ruin included. This would be the climax. If I timed it right, she and Alan would be hit from multiple directions at once, leaving them no room to wriggle out. I had in mind a particular date to trigger it, 2 weeks before her Vegas trip. I didn't want to wait until after, because that trip would basically be them celebrating and maybe suspicion could arise if I did anything too close to it. 2 weeks before gave me enough time to drop bombs and watch fallout while legally locking things in place. The emotional manipulation phase had done its job. Marina was, by all appearances, convinced I was a loving, if a bit moody, husband, still oblivious to her infidelity. Alan likely thought I was a dupe as well. They probably had little emergency plan beyond, if he finds out, it'll suck. They had no idea of the tsunami coming. I remember the last night of true normalcy we spent together, roughly a day before I set things in motion. We watched a movie in each other's arms on the couch. She fell asleep against my shoulder. I looked down at her and felt, well, I'll admit, I felt sorrow. Despite everything, despite my anger, there was an ache that this was how it had to end, that the woman I once adored would soon be wrecked and miserable, and that I was actively causing it. In that moment, I wasn't regretting it. She earned this. But I acknowledged internally that this was a tragic end to something that once was beautiful. It's like looking at a rose, knowing you're about to toss it into a fire. I kissed the top of her head gently as she slept. One last tender gesture she didn't even register. A silent goodbye to the love that had once been. Then, I carefully eased out from under her, went to my home office, and made the final arrangements for D-Day. D-Day arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning, a day that would mark the beginning of their social and financial ruin. My plan required precise timing and coordination of multiple blows, so that neither Marina nor Alan could effectively respond or escape the consequences. I had often automated deployments in my tech career, pressing a button to release a software update to millions of users. This felt similar, a multi-pronged deployment of destruction, set to trigger in sequence. At 9:30 a.m., after Marina had left for work, she kissed me goodbye, heading off a bit early, claiming she had a morning meeting. I gave my lawyer Patricia the green light via a text. File now. Within minutes, the divorce petition was electronically filed at the courthouse. In it, as agreed, were detailed claims of her adultery, backed by an attached exhibit list referencing evidence. The full evidence would remain confidential unless needed. But the gist was there. The petition asked for an unequal division of assets in my favor per the prenup and due to marital misconduct, and explicitly sought to enforce the infidelity clause. It also preemptively requested a temporary restraining order on disposing of assets, just to freeze things. By 10 a.m., a professional process server was en route to her workplace with the papers. I had decided, for maximum impact and humiliation, to have her served at work. This was risky, some might consider it cruel, but I wanted her knocked off balance among peers, and also it would likely get around office gossip quickly, accelerating her embarrassment. While that was in motion, I set up an email to go out to Marina about an hour after I expected her to be served. In that email, which I drafted but left unsent yet, I basically laid out that I knew everything, that I have all the evidence, and that any attempt to destroy evidence or lie was futile. I didn't pour my heart out or anything. It was cold and factual. I told her I'd moved out, a lie at that moment, but I intended to be gone before she got home, and that all communications should go through my lawyer from now on. I didn't tell her where I was, and I informed her that if she tried to contact me directly before I was ready, I wouldn't respond. In effect, I was ghosting her aside from necessary legal interactions. I scheduled this email to send around noon. Next, I had to deal with Alan simultaneously. Since I couldn't have him legally served like her, I opted for the shock and awe approach. I drafted an email from a throwaway account to him, CCing his HR department and the head of his company. I'd found their emails or plausible emails through some guesswork and verification. The email was polite, formal, and devastating. It stated, "Dear Mr. Allen's last name and company HR, this is to inform you that it has come to my attention that Mr. Allen last name, an employee at company, has been engaged in an illicit affair with his direct manager, Mrs. Marina's maiden last name, nay, her maiden, as she may be known in professional records. This affair took place during work hours and involved misuse of company time and resources. See attached photographs of the two at park name during work hours on date, and leaving motel during what appears to be a long lunch break on date. They have not disclosed this relationship to the company, which is a violation of company policy per the Employee Handbook section on relationships and conflict of interest. Additionally, it is my understanding that they planned to attend a work-related conference in Las Vegas together, presumably to continue their inappropriate relationship under the guise of professional development. I bring this to your attention as it raises serious concerns about workplace ethics and potential liability. I trust your organization will address this matter promptly and appropriately. Sincerely, Anonymous." I debated whether to anonymize or not. In the end, I chose not to name myself. Let HR do the digging, though they'd likely figure it out or ask them directly. but it being anonymous added a twist of fear for them. Who else knew? I attached two of the less intimate photos, just them kissing in a semi-public place where it's clearly them. I scheduled this email to send at 10:15 a.m. That would mean Alan and HR get it likely just as or right after Marina is being served. Beautiful. I didn't want to plaster it on Facebook or something. That might actually garner me some mixed reactions about airing dirty laundry. Instead, I chose a more targeted approach. I had written a short, factual message and sent individually to a curated list of people, her parents, her two closest friends, and a couple of our mutual friends who knew us as a couple. In the message, I stated that I was devastated to inform them that I discovered Marina had been having an affair for X months with a colleague. I said I have filed for divorce, and while it's a painful and private matter, I felt they should know the truth rather than any spin that might come out. I also subtly implied evidence by saying, I have given her every opportunity to come clean, and even confronted her with proof, but she continued to lie until presented with overwhelming evidence. This wasn't exactly how events went down, but it headed off any attempt from her to claim this was a misunderstanding or me being crazy. I kept the tone measured and said I appreciate their understanding during this difficult time. This would effectively nuke her image in those circles, because they'd all know she cheated blatantly. I also wrote a separate text to her parents, with whom I had a decent relationship, more personal, expressing that I was sorry it turned out this way, that I did love them as in-laws, but their daughter did something I cannot forgive. I expected them to be upset, but ultimately she's their child, so they may still support her. Still, they were conservative folks. Infidelity would greatly disappoint them. I scheduled these messages to go out by 10:30 a.m. Now, I didn't plan on physically confronting her in person initially. I wanted to observe the initial fallout from a safe distance. Specifically, I wanted to see her reaction to being served and possibly catch an initial confrontation between her and Alan at work if it happened. Here's where my tech side came in handy. I still had that GPS tracker on her car, and I could covertly be nearby. I drove to a parking lot adjacent to her office building where I wouldn't easily be spotted, using my friend Eric's gray Honda again for anonymity. The process server was due to serve her around 11 a.m. at her office, a time I knew she'd likely be at her desk. Sure enough, at about 11:20, I got a text from Patricia. She's been served. My phone is already blowing up from attorneys calling presumably on her behalf. I had pre-warned Patricia that I expected Marina might scramble to find a lawyer quickly once served, but not to engage beyond giving them the basics. From my car, I could not see into her high-rise, of course. But I soon saw movement via the tracker. Around 11:45, her car GPS started moving. Interesting. She left midday. I tailed from a distance. She didn't go home. Instead, she went to a local cafe. She parked and went inside. I recognized that cafe as a spot she and I used to go on weekends. Perhaps it was a quiet spot she retreated to in crisis. I parked where I could observe the entrance. A few minutes later, another car pulled up fast. Alan's. He hopped out and hurried inside. So, they were meeting up to discuss. That cafe likely felt safe since it wasn't by the office and not many colleagues would be around there on a weekday. My heart pounded as I contemplated stepping in. This was an opportunity to confront them both unexpectedly. But I held back for now. I wanted to see their raw interaction first, and ideally I wanted her to stew a bit longer. Thanks to some tech gear, yes, I was prepared like a spy. I had a directional microphone setup in my car, essentially a parabolic mic that can pick up conversations from a distance, line of sight. It's not perfect through glass, but if they sat by the window, and indeed they chose a window seat, probably for her to watch if anyone followed. I aimed the dish and listened through headphones, recording it. The quality was a bit muffled, cafe ambient noise, but I caught bits. She was frantic. I could imagine her face. Served me at work, divorce, all over the papers. He knows Alan. He knows everything, she was saying, voice hushed but panicky. Alan. Stay calm. HR emailed me. Someone ratted to HR about us just minutes after you got served. They CC'd the CEO. I think it's him. It has to be him. Marina sounded on the verge of tears. Oh God, I'm going to lose my job. They'll fire me, Alan. And divorce. What do I do? What do we do? Alan. We need to stick together. It'll be okay. Maybe his evidence is bluffing. We were careful mostly. Could he have hired a PI? She let out a bitter laugh. He's not bluffing. The divorce petition. It lists dates and names. He attached pictures, Alan. My lawyer texted me copies. She must have engaged a lawyer swiftly indeed, or at least a friend who's a lawyer to get that. There was a long pause. I imagine Alan processing the doom, evidence, HR involved, etc. Then he said quietly, I'm so sorry, Marina. She started crying, audibly even through my mic. My life is falling apart. I was so stupid. How did I think? She didn't finish. Perhaps, how did I think we wouldn't get caught? This was a moment of actual consequence hitting her. Oddly, hearing her cry did tug at me. This was the woman I had loved, now in genuine distress. But I reminded myself, she brought this on herself. Actions have consequences. I steadied my breathing and kept listening. Alan tried to comfort her. He reached over to hold her hand. My vantage allowed me to see that. We'll get through it. Maybe if you talk to him, explain yourself, or maybe he'll be open to an amicable arrangement. She snapped, anger mixing with tears. Amicable? He's out for blood. You didn't see his eyes when we met at that pub night. I thought maybe I was imagining it. But it's clear now. He set this all up. He's destroying us. Interesting. She picked up something at the pub night. Perhaps my "I've heard a lot about you" line unsettled her more than I thought. Or maybe in hindsight she is reevaluating my behavior. Too late. Then she said something that shocked even me. I have to save myself. I need to try to talk to him. Maybe I can apologize. Throw myself at his mercy. I don't know. If this goes to court, I'm ruined. The prenup, I'll get nothing, Alan. And if I lose my job too, oh God. Alan looked pained, but also a bit fearful for himself, of course. Maybe you should try. He might cool down eventually. She mumbled. He told me he loved me just days ago. Acted so normal. How could he be so cold planning this? I almost laughed at that. The irony of her asking that question. How could I be so cold? Welcome to the mirror, Marina. Finally, they left the cafe together, each looking grim. I slunk down, and they didn't notice me in the car as they drove off. Oddly, in separate cars. Perhaps to avoid more suspicion or because they knew HR stuff was about to go down and they shouldn't be seen together. The tracker showed she went to her friend and co-worker Stephanie's house instead of back to work, possibly to hide out or seek advice. Alan went back to the office, probably to face the music with HR. I didn't plan on confronting her that same day face to face. The papers and revelations did the initial talking. I retreated to the prearranged place I'd set up. I had indeed moved some of my stuff quietly to my friend Eric's place and to the storage unit. That afternoon, I went home while she was out and packed the rest of my essentials. She still hadn't come home, and in fact, she wouldn't that night. She stayed at Stephanie's, as I gleaned from a later text exchange. I left a printed copy of a letter on the kitchen table, in an envelope with her name, knowing she'd eventually come by. In it, I stated that I hope she understands the gravity of what she's done, that I didn't enjoy having to do things this way, but her choices left me no option. I told her our communication will be through lawyers only for now. I also informed her that I had taken the liberty of changing the locks. I did that afternoon, and that any personal items of hers she needed immediately should be listed, and I'd have them delivered. It was very formal, almost businesslike. Then I locked up and left the house, moving in with Eric temporarily. I also knew that by changing the locks, I might be provoking anger, but the house was in my name originally, and the prenup, plus I had indeed checked with Patricia, who said I could justify it as securing the premises after abandonment. She left work and didn't return, etc. Maybe a gray area, but again this was more symbolic, and I was fine later to provide her access for retrieving items under supervision. Reputation-wise, by the end of that day, the news was spreading among social circles. One of our mutual friends texted me, "Oh my God, I just heard. I'm so sorry, man. I had no idea she would do that to you." So someone I told had already spilled to others. Not ideal, but I expected gossip. Her parents called me, but I didn't answer. They left a tearful voicemail apologizing for their daughter's behavior and asking me to please talk to them sometime. They were clearly embarrassed and sorry. I felt a twinge of pity for them. On social media, I stayed silent. However, I noticed by evening that Marina's profiles were deactivated. Perhaps she couldn't bear people commenting, or she preemptively left to avoid it. Alan's profile, which was mostly private to me before, also went dark a day later. Their world was shrinking. Financially, within a week, she was indeed fired from her company for the policy violation. She had a meeting with HR. Patricia later told me her lawyer revealed that in negotiations. Alan was also fired, I learned. Their company considered the anonymity breach and public nature too much liability. So both of them unemployed. Divorce negotiations started in earnest after about a week. As expected, given the evidence and prenup, her side crumbled swiftly. She waived any contest on the asset division I proposed, which was basically, she keeps her car, personal belongings, and a small bank account she had. I keep the rest, including house and my investments. She even waived spousal support formally in writing. Our prenup said no alimony if infidelity, but we made it mutually agreed to waive to avoid any doubt. The entire divorce could be done on paper in a couple months with no trial, which was exactly what I wanted. Quick and decisive. In exchange for her cooperation, I agreed not to press the dissipation issue and not to subpoena Alan for a deposition, etc. Essentially, I offered a slightly gentler annihilation if she didn't drag it out. She took the deal, likely because every lawyer she consulted told her she'd be shredded in court. I was not magnanimous beyond that. I did not meet her to talk closure or accept apologies in person. At the most, through lawyers, I got a short letter from her apologizing for the hurt she caused. It was likely coached by her attorney, but I think parts were sincere. I didn't respond to it. To me, it was done. I didn't forget the lover in all this. He faced immediate consequences: job loss, humiliation at work, likely difficulty finding a new role in the industry locally because word got around. Our tech community isn't huge and gossip spreads. But I wanted a little more. Nothing illegal, just a taste of social shaming. So, I anonymously mailed copies of a couple of those intimate pictures, them cuddling at the park, entering the motel, to a few of his close acquaintances whose addresses I'd gleaned via public records and social media, parents, maybe a sibling. The envelope simply had a note: Thought you should know what Alan has been up to. Cruel? Maybe. But I was past caring about his feelings. If he had a decent family or friend network, they'd now know his character as a homewrecker and cheat. One could argue that was overkill, but at the time I felt it was justified. He knew she was married and pursued it anyway. Let him feel some consequences beyond just the professional. Within our community, it quickly became known that she cheated, and I divorced her for it. Friends divided into camps, mostly supportive of me, a few neutral or saying marriage issues are private. No one openly sided with her, except perhaps Stephanie, the friend she stayed with, out of loyalty. But even she kept quiet publicly. It's hard to defend the cheater when the evidence is stark, especially as I ended up quietly sharing a couple of non-explicit photos with a couple of her friends who doubted, with a "please don't spread this further" pretense, knowing full well it had spread. I know I was basically orchestrating gossip, but I only had to drop the proof and let natural curiosity do the rest. Her social life imploded. She avoided attending gatherings we used to both frequent. Meanwhile, I actually got more invites out from friends wanting to cheer me up or show support. I heard through grapevine that she was depressed, staying with her parents out of state after a while. She retreated there once it was clear she had no job and no local support. Alan apparently had to move too. He had trouble finding a new job, and with no local ties beyond that job, he packed up and went back to his hometown in another state. They did not stay together as far as I know. The pressure of joblessness and mutual blame probably tore them apart quickly. I did read one of their last text exchanges in the data I had. She angrily told him, "My life is ruined," and he responded somewhat coldly about how he lost a lot too. No loving "we'll run away together" finale for them, it seemed. One late evening, about a month after the initial blow-up, I found myself sitting alone in my half-empty house. I moved back in after changing locks, and after she took whatever belongings we agreed on, which was little. I poured myself a glass of scotch, a habit I'd picked up to replace the missing warmth in the house. I had won, undeniably. The legal papers granting the divorce and assets were filed. She was gone from my life materially, her reputation in tatters. I was victorious and alone, exactly as planned. The silence in the house was heavy. No sound of her voice, no scent of her perfume, nothing. I walked through the rooms, and it almost felt like a museum of a past life. In our bedroom, I stared at the bed. I could vividly recall the nights I'd laid there agonizing while she was with him. Now only I slept in it, diagonally across to fill the space. I can't claim I felt happy in that moment. Relief, yes. Satisfaction, certainly. A grim satisfaction that justice, in my eyes, had been served. But happiness? That emotion had been scorched out of the ground, perhaps to regrow later like a forest after a fire, but not yet. I stepped outside to the backyard, the cool night air greeting me. Interestingly, I felt no urge to check her social media or contact her. I was truly done. I looked up at the stars, the same sky I'd looked at weeks ago when formulating this plan. It struck me that I felt free. Free of her lies, of the gnawing suspicion and dread. Free to rebuild without the sand foundation of a dishonest partner. Yes, I was alone, but I was at peace with that. I raised my glass quietly and made a toast to the empty yard, whispering to myself, to new beginnings. It sounded cliched, but at that point I needed the cliché. Inside, on the kitchen counter, lay the remnants of the day's mail. Among them, ironically, a brochure for a home security system, advertising how to keep your loved ones safe and sound. I smirked darkly. Security, trust, love. I had tried to secure my marriage and love with meticulous care, but in the end, It was blown apart from within. No system can guard against betrayal from the one you trust most. But I guarded myself. I reminded that voice in my head. I protected myself from further harm and delivered consequences to those who wronged me. My phone buzzed then, a text from an unknown number. I opened it and saw it was from Marina. She must have gotten my new number from a mutual contact or via some records. It read, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I just want to say again how deeply sorry I am. You didn't deserve any of this. I'll regret it the rest of my life. I hope one day you find it in you to forgive me, not for me, but so you aren't carrying hate. You were a great husband. I'm so sorry." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to smash the phone. Another part wanted to reply with a barrage of all the hurtful things I had bottled up. But then I recalled my own evolution through this ordeal. The cold persona I adopted to execute the revenge was not the real, whole me. It was a part, a tool I used. Now that the task was done, I didn't need to carry that icy hatred forever. I could set it down eventually. Forgive her? Not today. Maybe not any day soon. But hate? I realized I didn't truly hate her at my core. I felt anger and hurt, yes, but hate is a consuming fire, and I had no interest in letting her occupy any more of my mental real estate with such intensity. I deleted the message. No reply. That was the kindest thing I could do for both of us, really. Standing there alone, I found myself reflecting. I had executed a plan that left two people's lives in ruins. They weren't physically harmed, but their finances, careers, relationships, all scorched earth. I wondered if that made me a bad person, or just a justified one. Perhaps both. But I did know one thing. I had respected myself enough not to let them get away with it. Some might say I should have just walked away and be the bigger person. Maybe. But walking away with my silence would have left me feeling emasculated and defeated. This way, I reclaimed my narrative. I didn't just survive their betrayal. I made it the worst decision of their lives. In the months that followed, I focused on my work, picked up some old hobbies. I returned to playing guitar, something I'd stopped during the marriage due to time. I went to therapy a bit, just to sort through the tumult. I didn't talk to the therapist so much about what I did to them. I glossed that part. But more about my pain and how to heal and eventually trust again, maybe. It will be a long road to trust anyone romantically. But I'm not in a rush. One late afternoon, as I left a session, I got a call from Eric. "Hey, just checking on you. How's the single life treating you, man?" I looked out at the horizon, the setting sun giving the city a golden hue. "It's quiet," I said. "But it's all right. Better than lies. Better than drama." He laughed. "I'll drink to that. We miss you at game night. You coming this week?" I smiled genuinely, something I hadn't done in a while. "Wouldn't miss it." As I hung up, I realized he and my other friends still treated me the same, just with a bit more care and camaraderie. I hadn't lost them. In fact, if anything, I felt more bonded to those who stood by me. One day, maybe I'll love someone again. But next time, I'll make damn sure we're on the same page or I'll sniff out betrayal early. Not that I plan to become paranoid, but I've learned the hard way to trust my instincts and not ignore red flags. Before starting my car, I took a moment to just breathe. A memory flashed unbidden. Our wedding day. Her smiling face as she vowed fidelity and love. I felt a pang, like pressing a bruise. It's okay to have those feelings, I reminded myself. What's important is that I know that those vows were broken by her, not by me. I kept mine, and when she broke hers, I ended the union and held her accountable. In a way, perhaps twisted, that was me honoring the sanctity of marriage by not letting the betrayal stand without consequence. I headed home. My home, now entirely mine and free of deceit. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I had emerged from this trial not as a victim, but as a man who stood up for himself with a relentless, cold fire. I am victorious and alone. And for now, that's exactly how it should be.